Hello, everybody, and welcome to the greatest games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. Of course, Jonathan Wilson is here. And with us today is Michael Taylor, a historian and author whose book, The Interest, How the British Establishment Resisted the Abolition of Slavery, was shortlisted for the 2021 Orwell Prize for Political Writing. Michael, pleasure to have you on the pod.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Today we go back to the summer of 1982 to the World Cup in Spain for the first round match that finished Spain 0, Northern Ireland 1. Michael, why have you chosen this game?
Well, as you can probably tell from my accent, I am Northern Irish, but sadly there are very few matches from my formative years that you might want to talk about. Growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, as a Northern Irishman, there really wasn't very much to cheer about. We obviously reached our nadir. I think it was the 2004 Euros qualifying campaign where we didn't score a goal under Sammy McIlroy. Things did pick up a little bit. We beat England at Windsor Park. David Healy scored a hat-trick to beat Spain. We beat Sweden in the same qualifying campaign. But I think in terms of the greatest event in Northern Irish history, footballing history, this is probably the match to talk about.
Yeah, you can't really argue with that one, Jonathan, can you? And the wonderful backdrop of the 1982 World Cup in Spain.
Oh yeah, I mean my first World Cup, and as I've said when we did the final of this tournament with Matt Lorenzo, just everything about that tournament informed what I think football should be. Kits should look like that, crowd should sound like that, the TV pictures should look like that. Mm-hmm. It was,
and Northern Irish results should look like this as well.
Well, maybe I wouldn't go that far, but
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I thought Michael would agree with me there.
There is definitely something to be said for teams, underdogs winning in matches of extreme violence is something that we can all get behind.
Yeah, it's a very different Spain to what we know now, but we'll come to that, I'm sure. But of course, it wasn't the first time Northern Ireland had qualified for the World Cup. They did reach the World Cup quarterfinals in 1958, where they were beaten 4-0 by France. But between 58 and 82, they didn't really come close, did they, Michael, for qualifying for the World Cup?
The team in 58, I think, was pretty unarguably good. There's Harry Gregg in nets, Danny Blanchflower was the captain, Billy Bingham, who was then the manager in 82, and I'm sure Jonathan can riff about what a wonderful Sunderland legend he was.
Yep.
Jimmy McIlroy won the league with Burnley, Alf McMichael as well, though Jonathan probably not want to talk about his time at Newcastle quite so much. And Peter McParland, the Villa legend, who scored twice against Czechoslovakia in the playoff to get out of the groups in that World Cup, and twice against West Germany in a draw. They did lose 4-0 in the end to Just Fontaine's France, but I think getting to the quarterfinals for your country of 1.5 million people at the time, which is the least populous country ever to qualify for the World Cup, and was until 2006, I think, Trinidad and Tobago took it over. That was a real achievement. But between 58 and 82, there weren't really too many near misses. Although Northern Ireland probably should have qualified for the '66 World Cup, but Albania levelled in the second half in Tirana. We had to win that match to go through, and we drew, so we didn't. But yeah, for this reason, George Best never plays in a major championship. There was some consideration of picking him for the '82 World Cup, but in the end, that didn't happen.
You've mentioned Billy Bingham, so let's go to him. He was the man in charge, of course, of Northern Ireland in the '82 World Cup. He'd previously managed Northern Ireland in the late '60s and early '70s. Also managed Greece in the early '70s as well. But he was given the Northern Ireland job a second time in 1980. And, Michael, things were changing for Northern Ireland on the pitch in terms of some of the players they had, recognisable names in there. They won the British Home Championship that year in 1980. So there must have been a good mood around football in terms of playing and so on.
I mean, there was. I don't think Bingham lost any of his first 8 or 9 matches in his second term in charge. But he himself wasn't coming off a particularly golden spell of management. I think his last job before this was with Mansfield Town in the old 3rd or 4th division. And then there was a club job in Greece before that. But with small countries, it's really hard to say that there's a systemic problem or a systemic, something good going on systemically. It's simply whether or not you just have enough players, like a critical threshold of decent players who are the same age arriving at the same time. And Northern Ireland between 80 and 82, maybe even until 86, have got enough players who are either just hanging on to the peak of their powers or just coming into them. So in the squad that goes through the qualification process, Pat Jennings is still in nets. He's 36, 37 at the time. He's at Arsenal. And he was alongside Best, probably one of the two indisputably world-class players that Northern Ireland had in that generation. There are people. Sammy McIlroy just finished quite a lengthy spell at Man United. The two Nichols had both played in the first division. Martin O'Neill was winning 2 European Cups with Nottingham Forest. Jerry Armstrong, who goes on to become a legend of Northern Irish and then eventually the anti-hero of Spanish football, was winning the league with Watford in 1982, had spent 5 years at Spurs. So it's tempting to describe the Northern Irish squad as a team of journeymen or people who weren't quite good enough, but at various stages in their career, they had been serious first division players.
Yeah, it was a decent squad, Jonathan. No doubt about that. As you say, the household names and legends of the game.
Yeah, Norman Whiteside's just emerging. I mean, he was 17 about 7 weeks, I think, in this particular game.
Bingham hadn't seen him play for Man United. He'd seen him play in the reserves a couple of times because Whiteside had only played 2 matches, matches for United, but went with him. It was the kind of thing that Bingham, he did it again in '86 with David Campbell, just picked somebody on potential as much as reputation.
And I mean, I guess Northern Ireland as well, the sort of the decade leading up to this, they'd actually, if you look at the players, they'd been pretty good. They'd had a serious core of first division players. But of course, there was so much going on in the background with Northern Ireland. And we did the podcast with Michael Walker talking about the exile from Belfast, having to play games at Hillsborough, at Boothby Park, Craven Cottage, having to sort of be itinerant around England because it was seen as unsafe to play in Belfast. So obviously, when your home games are not at home, that makes everything that much harder. And maybe that generation could have done what this generation did and just didn't. I mean, I guess the World Cup was smaller, which made it harder to qualify for, but also had that huge issue of not being able to play at Windsor Park until that game against Yugoslavia we did with Michael.
Yeah, and it's playing at Windsor Park, which is if of the 70s and 80s and even longer, it is a cold Tuesday night away at Stoke. It's inhospitable, pretty intimidating ground to go to. And Northern, I think they're unbeaten in qualifying for the '82 World Cup at Windsor Park. Their best display, they beat Sweden 3-0. They grab a 1-0 victory over Portugal, hold Scotland to a draw, and then in the last match, they need to win. They beat Israel 1-0. Jerry Armstrong scores. So that's key to them getting through. It's a tough group. I mean, they're the 4th seed in a group of 5. Scotland probably one of the better Scottish teams, or that generation probably the best Scottish team ever. Sweden and Portugal, fairly large European countries with strong footballing traditions, and then even Israel, effectively help Northern Ireland because I think they beat Portugal in Tel Aviv, which effectively knocks Portugal out.
Yeah, and matched with the impressive qualification, which they weren't, as you say, fancied to go through from that group. And then with the 1984 was the first World Cup to feature 24 teams, and it all kind of worked out quite nicely. And so what was getting to the World Cup for Northern Ireland? As Jonathan said, in the background of Northern Ireland, the picture wasn't too rosy. It must have been quite an achievement and brought a bit of sort of fever pitch around the country for the tournament.
Northern Ireland in the late 1970s and early 80s was still, it was maybe not quite the height of the Troubles, but not far off it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was 78, there was the bombing at the Le Mans Hotel. 79 was the winter of discontent generally in the UK, but there was also the murder of Mountbatten and the War in Point Ambush. These are fairly seminal, sad moments in the history of the Troubles. By the time you get into the early 80s, unemployment is horrendous, especially in Northern Ireland. The DeLorean factory is about to close and a mire of scandal. And 81 is the summer of the hunger strikes. And it's quite important. I mean, it's not to say that the success of the football team was a panacea that would solve Northern Ireland's social and political ills. It wasn't, and it didn't, and it would be ridiculous to suggest otherwise. But what was really important, I think, is that 4 of the really key members of this team were Catholics. And even for Pat Jennings, Martin O'Neill, Mal Donaghy, and Jerry Armstrong. And even if playing for Northern Ireland or recognising Northern Ireland was in some parts of the country politically sensitive, this was still, it was a cross-community team that at least whenever Northern Ireland were playing could engender some sense of fraternity and community.
And how did Bingham manage this? Was he particularly, for those who don't know him, was he a particularly sort of big character that in the press and with his team, or what was his style of management and his persona around the time?
Well, I think he was regarded as quite a stern, hard man who was incredibly competitive and placed significant emphasis on the physical aspects of football. So whenever he was growing up as a forward in Belfast, he was quite a lean, spindly figure. So he ended up doing a weight regime with a guy called Buster McFarlane, who ends up being Mary Peters' personal trainer whenever she wins a gold medal at the 72 Olympics. And this kind of physical rigor he brings to the Northern Irish team. And there's a summer camp in '82 before the World Cup. Now, England and Scotland have both gone to America to acclimatise to the hot climate. Northern Ireland are in Brighton for 10 days.
It's slightly warmer than Belfast, isn't it?
Slightly warmer than Belfast. And look, I think it was luckily very hot during that fortnight. But one of Bingham's sort of his training methods was, I think he went to the University of Sussex and said, "Right, who's your best long distance runner?" And said, "Right, boys, you're just going to chase him around for 10 days." Because I think he knew quite sensibly that if Northern Ireland were going to have a chance of getting out of the group, that kind of high energy pressing, constant defending in soaring temperatures, that was going to be the only way to do it.
And you mentioned that you touched on his time at Sunderland. So he played under Alan Brown at Sunderland. Alan Brown, although he ends up leading Sunderland to relegation twice, which I think from a modern perspective gives a slightly false impression. He was incredibly innovative and also incredibly tough. So one of the things Alan Brown had done to get players fit was to have them build a new training centre, literally have the players building the walls, carrying the bricks, mixing the cement. Because his logic was, physical work is good training. It's all work is good work, and if we do it, we don't have to pay anybody else to do it. So I'm not sure if Bingham would have been there when the training centre was built, but he certainly worked under Brown, who had these ideas of training that were pretty brutal. I mean, he also famously, when the training ground at Sunderland was frozen, he took the players down to Seaburn Beach, and they just played on the beach. And then he made them run into the sea when it's sort of sub-zero. And then they would chase back to Rugger Park, where there were 2 baths. So the first people back got the hot bath. And obviously that's pretty stimulating. That's a big incentive to win that race back.
Well, what did some of the players make of his management style or sort of methods, if you like, because you say Martin O'Neill had won a couple of European Cups by this point. Pat Jennings, a legend of the game, and so on. Did this provide some squad harmony, or how did the players take to this?
I think that once you were in with him, once you were one of his players, and Northern didn't change their starting lineup in the World Cup, and very, very rarely during qualification either. Then he was intensely loyal to that player. And obviously he'd been around Northern Ireland football for ages, so it would have been impossible for any of these players not to know who he was or what his reputation was. And it worked, I think, because he gelled this team together fantastically well.
So if you, absolutely. But then does it make his decision to take Whiteside? I mean, I know you cited another young player that he took. Were people surprised at that? A 17-year-old lad, he was the youngest player to appear in a World Cup finals when he made his full debut against Yugoslavia. Was that seen as a huge gamble, or were people thinking, oh, hang on a minute, we've got a gem here?
Well, I think they knew they had a gem in their hands. The question was, in selecting, was it going to be Whiteside or was it going to be George Best? And George Best is 35 or 36 at the time. In a later interview, he claims that he was incredibly fit at the time and that he was playing 3 hours of racket sports a day, and that the only problem was he was playing for a crap team in America. He was playing for San Jose Earthquakes at the time, and that the couple of times that Bingham saw him play, San Jose just got destroyed. So he thought he was out of nick. I'm not sure how much of that is true because Best at this stage, he tried to sign terms with Bolton, I think, in 1981, and it didn't come to fruition. And the only games he ended up playing in 1982 were guest appearances in the Hong Kong First Division. So whether or not he could have fitted into this team, was Best somebody who was going to do endless tracking back and defending and all of this fitness work? I'm not sure.
And I think also just Best brings a circus with him. Through no fault of his own. Best will always be the story, and that can be a huge distraction. And
no fault of his own.
Well, okay. Well, what I mean by that is, even if he had knuckled down, absolutely followed every tactical instruction he was given, there would still be this enormous circus there.
Yeah. Okay.
So clearly his activities over the previous 20 years had contributed to that. Whereas Whiteside, I mean, a physically hugely imposing teenager, who clearly was going to do what he was told and was going to follow instructions and wasn't going to bring any of that nonsense with him.
Yeah, and gets not only makes his debut against Yugoslavia, but gets booked for, I think, hitting the Yugoslavian centre half on debut. Yeah. So he was definitely not afraid of that kind of play.
Definitely not. All right, chaps, so let's have a quick break and then we'll talk about the football itself. Back in a moment, everybody. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard. So then, gentlemen, to Spain, 1982. Jerry Armstrong said years after the events that unfolded in Spain that the plan was apparently to get a draw with Yugoslavia, beat Honduras, and then draw with Spain. And that would be enough to go through. And their opening match, of course, was against Yugoslavia, a country with a big football tradition. Obviously, we know what subsequently happened there. But 0-0, not a bad start, Michael, for Northern Ireland.
An incredibly good start, I think. Strong team, and arguably had done an awful lot better over the last 16 to 20 years of international football than Spain had done. So 0-0 draw against Yugoslavia in the first match not only goes to plan, but is in itself actually a really respectable result. So probably since '64, whenever Spain won the European Championship, Yugoslavia had the much more impressive record in international football. There were a couple of semi-finals in the World Cup, a couple of beaten finalists on a couple of occasions in the Euros. And I think perhaps the strength of Yugoslavian football in the 60s and 70s is forgotten because of the subsequent dissolution of the country. But really 0-0 Northern Ireland, I would take that any day of the week.
Yeah, so a good start. Whiteside's up and running in the side, and Spain themselves, they had drawn 1-1 against Honduras, which would have been a disappointing result for them. They obviously then beat Yugoslavia 2-1. And in Spain, in Northern Ireland's second game, they drew 1-1 with Honduras. And this is the spanner in the works. That the plan hadn't been executed, Michael.
So, on the face of it, that's a disappointing result. And it's especially disappointing because Armstrong had scored in the first half and then Honduras equalised. But Honduras had won the CONCACAF qualification championship. They'd knocked out Mexico. They'd gone unbeaten through that tournament, although it was held in Honduras, so God knows what was actually going on. But they're not perhaps the minnows that you would immediately think. They seem to have been an incredibly competent team that were probably playing in a very similar way to Northern Ireland. I don't know because I've never seen video footage of that match.
I think there was sort of a general sense in this tournament that the minnows were playing much better than people anticipated. I mean, Algeria, obviously, I think it was actually the same day as this game, wasn't it? The disgrace in Gijón when Austria and West Germany collude in the 1-0 win for West Germany, which takes both through at Algeria's expense. But Algeria had beaten West Germany. Honduras were playing better than people had expected. Cameroon were doing very well in Italy's group, and they end up only going out on goals scored. So I think, partly because the World Cup expanded from 16 teams to 24, there was this scrutiny of the smaller nations of do they merit their place? And pretty quickly, El Salvador got battered 10-1 to Hungary. But by and large, it was a resounding yes. The football has grown and the likes of Honduras absolutely merit their place. Although I do get the sense of Honduras, they haven't really changed in 40 years. They're just a horrible, brutal, nasty defensive team get good results, but you would hate to watch them and you hate to play against them.
I didn't enjoy. I haven't enjoyed watching them since. Put it that way.
Yeah. And if anybody has enjoyed watching Honduras play, do get in touch with Michael on Twitter.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, to set the scene then, going into this final game for Northern Ireland in the group, Yugoslavia, obviously, they'd beaten Honduras in their final group, which was played 24 hours before Spain versus Northern Ireland, which be due to that Germany and Austria business that you mentioned, Jonathan, that the rules were rightly changed. It seems crazy that was the case.
Well, a basic belief in people's honesty. Very foolish.
And FIFA were the ones who were
shocked and appalled.
It takes one to know one, etc. So a win or a draw would have seen Spain top the group. A Spain win or a goalless draw would have meant Yugoslavia going through at Northern Ireland's expense. A 1-1 draw would have seen Yugoslavia and Northern Ireland drawing lots between to see who would qualify for the next phase with Spain, which if I may, Michael, just for a brief moment, I'm sort of quite regretful that didn't happen, because I just would have been quite incredible to see that. But for Northern Ireland's, for Northern Ireland, I'm very glad that they won 1-0. So a 2-2 draw or a Northern Ireland would have been enough to go through for Bingham's boys. So
if Northern Ireland won 2-0, Spain were out.
Yeah. Yes. Important to say that as well. So the scene was set really, playing the percentages and the averages and all for Spain to kind of win, top the group, and for Northern Ireland to gallantly go home that evening in Valencia.
So Northern Ireland have gone from Saragossa to Valencia. Spain have played all of their group matches at the Mestalla, or it was the Luis Casanova Stadium at the time. So it really is, it's a home grind. And it's probably, you can't underestimate the amount of pressure that's on Spain, actually. Because the recent Spanish history had been incredibly complicated. Franco had only died in 1975. This ETA was at its probably at the bloodiest stage of its campaign in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. There'd been an attempted coup d'etat the previous year, much of which had happened in Valencia. So I think this World Cup was a real opportunity, in the same way that Seoul was later in the decade, an opportunity for Spain to present itself as a functioning, competent country in the international stage. There was also intense footballing pressure, because the Spain of 1982 is not, or was not, the powerhouse that we now think of it. There hadn't been a Spanish winner of the European Cup since '66, I think. Was the last time, Real Madrid. Sociedad had been champions for the 2 previous years. So again, there's an expectation and a demand, I think, on the behalf of the Spanish public, to get this job done, to give a good showing and go as far as possible with home advantage.
And there's also the style of Spanish football, which becomes very apparent, is very different to how we think of Spanish football now. We think of Spanish football now as being very possession heavy, all about short passes. And when it goes wrong for them now, it tends to be because of a lack of incisiveness. That they'll dominate a game but won't be able to finish the opponent off. Whereas this was still the age of La Furia Roja, the Red Fury, and that was that nickname came from 1920 Olympics with a game when Spain had beaten, I think, the Netherlands in Antwerp, and as a Dutch journalist compared the furious style with which Spain played to the sack of Antwerp by Spanish troops in 16th century, and so La Furia Roja is born, and this is something that Franco is very keen. Although it's in a sense a Basque idea, he's very keen to pursue this because he likes this idea of it's about manliness and about toughness, and you wouldn't be doubting the manliness or toughness of this Spain side in this game.
It was absolutely brutal. The first half just appears to have been a bit of a fight, but a fight being refereed by somebody with a rather obvious, I'm going to say this from a certain perspective, but incredible bias. There was a Paraguayan referee.
Can we check Hector Ortiz is dead before we libel him?
No,
you're a lawyer. You are literally a lawyer. Is this allowed?
Well, I've seen people who played in the match say this on TV, so I think it's fine.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a Paraguayan referee and I think Peruvian touch judges, and some of the shoulder checks. Some of it's like this was war. It was really brutal. So David McCreary, who was not a shrinking violet, is absolutely flattened at one stage.
That is a horrendous foul. It's almost equivalent to Schumacher. It's just the shoulder, not the hip.
Yeah. It's an absolute shocker.
Sammy McIlroy almost loses a leg, and whenever he retaliates slightly, he gets booked. I think Billy Hamilton again.
Sorry, hang on. Retaliate slightly. He stamped on the guy.
Yes. Okay.
It was a bad foul on him, but he does stamp, and he could easily have been sent off for that.
Yes. I accept that.
On Sarah, I think it was, wasn't it?
I have just checked. He is still alive, but I believe he only refereed one game at World Cups. My sort of 10-second search just said. So maybe FIFA thought, that was a bit poor, that refereeing performance.
And this was it. This was his one and only game.
Yeah.
What a legacy.
Oh dear. But yeah, it was really was quite brutal, as you say, and it's a strange one because you would think that Spain, the hosts there, obviously there's a lot of pressure on them and so on, but you would think, Jonathan, that they would I don't know, not behave like that and kind of. I mean, I suppose they did take the game to.
This was Spanish football at the time. I mean, this was just moving into the great era of Athletic, of Bilbao, and Jose Camacho was a key figure in that, a key figure in this game. And football in Bilbao was all about physicality and toughness. This very sort of Basque idea of manliness. There's there's a game between, is it the Super Cup later this year when Villa play Barcelona, and that's an astonishingly brutal game. It's and you think of that Villa team, it's a pretty tough team, and they're sort of shocked by just how brutal Barcelona are. Even 2 years later, when Barcelona play Manchester United in the Cup Winners' Cup, that the great game at Old Trafford when Manchester United overcome a 2-goal deficit and win 3-0, which people say, and you're looking at the footage of it, you can see why. 'Cause people say it's the greatest ever atmosphere at Old Trafford, but you look at some of the tackles that fly in that game. Spanish football was a very, very tough game. I mean, Jimmy Hill's commentary in this game is astonishing. I don't think you get away with saying those things these days. So then he goes, "Oh, the Spanish people, they're so warm and friendly in the hotels, but they're really not on the pitch."
I think that's not too bad, is it?
Well, yeah,
for Jimmy Hill,
there's many worse things than that.
It was Jimmy. Oh, okay, you've got it.
You're Latins.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, Jimmy Hill in the 80s. Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah, point taken. But in among all the fighting on the brutal challenges, there was a game of football trying to be played out, and at halftime it's 0-0, and so far so good, I suppose, for Northern Ireland. But a 0-0 draw wouldn't have been enough, Michael.
No, we need a goal, and despite you'd think, given how brutal the Spanish were being, that they might have been the team under pressure defending, but no, they still had all the ball. It was Northern Ireland defending most of the time, but in the second half, 47-48 minutes, Jerry Armstrong picks up the ball maybe 20 yards inside his own half, so he begins a run, makes 40-50 yards pretty much unchallenged. Surprising in the context of this game that there isn't a scything hack from a retreating midfielder.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. How he wasn't taken down, I don't know.
But it's the point you were making about the long distance running and the need to press. It's actually a very modern goal in that it comes from pressing. Spain get themselves under a bit of pressure because of a couple of half challenges, and then he's the pass out to the left wing is not quite strong enough. Armstrong can nip in, and because of the turnover, there is a bit of space for him to accelerate into, and so it is that sort of. It's not a high press because it's happening sort of, as you say, 20 yards inside the Northern Ireland half. But it is from pressing that the turnover comes.
It is. So Armstrong then carries it almost up to the Spanish penalty area, gives it out to the right wing, where Billy Hamilton is marauding down the right. He's massive man. He's scored a couple of important goals in the qualification, playing for Burnley at the time. And he says, I'm just going to whip it into a difficult area, which he does. But then Luis Arconado, who I think on commentary is described as being one of the better goalkeepers in Europe or the world at the time, was playing for Sociedad at the time, so he's won the Spanish League 2 years in a row, just drops the ball, makes an absolute hash of it. To his credit, he does rebound pretty quickly. But the ball lands effectively on a plate for Armstrong, round about the penalty spot, and he does it. Even then, he does incredibly well. He keeps his balance, keeps the shot down through Arconado's legs, and it's 1-0.
Yeah, I find Hamilton's the way he goes past the defender quite interesting because he gives him quite a wide berth, and I understand that. I thought to myself, is that because he was quite pacey and so on? Obviously, he didn't lack pace. And then watching the fouls before, and I thought he must have thought, I'm going to really have to go wide of him, otherwise he's going to take me out. But you're right, it was a good finish from Armstrong, and he said, didn't he, that there was just bodies in the way of him, so to kind of keep it low. I mean, it was convenient. Obviously, it goes kind of through the goalkeeper's legs, because otherwise you'd have to place it maybe in the corner. But when he smacks it in and turns around to celebrate, it's a hell of a moment, and it's a real sucker punch, Jonathan, for Spain, who, obviously fans of a punch themselves.
Yeah, I mean, say it goes between the keeper's legs. I mean, it does go between the keeper's legs, but it goes between his legs because he's just sprung to his feet. Yeah, it's sort of almost goes under him because he's just bounced up. There's two retreating defenders who can't quite converge in time. I mean, Arconado, Arcanado was one of those, maybe even the very first foreign player who made an impression on me. That I really loved that the I don't know if it's this tournament or Euro '84 when he has the goalkeeping top. Yeah, it's an Adidas top with the navy sleeves and the paler blue body. In the Euro '84, he's brilliant during the tournament. Makes a couple of outstanding saves, and then he makes a terrible mistake to concede. Yeah, let's platinum these free kicks square under his body in the final. So I think his reputation was of a brilliant goalkeeper who had a mistake in him, and this was a mistake. But yeah, there's that great moment when Armstrong clearly realizes it's in fractionally before everybody else on the ground realizes it's in, and he stands there, sort of arms out.
Turns around, arms aloft, and I think it's relief as much as there's just a catharsis. This is what we needed. Now we know what we can do for the rest of the match.
And the extraordinary thing about Armstrong, and I didn't know this till last night. I was in the pub with some people Michael knows, and I was saying I was doing this podcast today with you, and a lad I played cricket with, Gordon, goes, I was at school in Brighton in the late 80s, and I was walking down the corridor one day, and I thought, that bloke looks a lot like Jerry Armstrong. And I thought, I think it is Jerry Armstrong. So he goes up to him and goes, are you Jerry Armstrong? And he goes, yes. And he goes, what are you doing in my school corridor? And he goes, I'm the caretaker. And he goes, why? And Jerry Armstrong goes, well, it's a good solid living being a school caretaker. So he when he finished playing, he before he became the regular commentator on Spanish football on TV, he becomes a school caretaker, which I mean, it's a sort of reflection of what a different age the 80s were. The footballers didn't earn that much, but also it's a reflection of he wasn't a star even at the time. He was playing for Watford. During this,
they just come up from the second division that summer.
Yeah, Graham Taylor's Watford, the side that then ends up finishing second in their first season, in the top flight. But yeah, he's a very he's not a star. He's a very ordinary bloke, and that of course makes it all the greater that he's the man who scores probably the most important goal in Northern Ireland's history.
Yeah, and just to rub it into the fans at Mestalla, I think whenever he signs for Mallorca, one of his first games is at the Mestalla and he scores again.
Same celebration? I do hope so.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. It's 1-0 Northern Ireland, and then 13 minutes later, the referee does send somebody off. He booked a few players in the first half, but Mal Donaghy is sent off. Was this harsh, Michael?
This was a total farce. This was ridiculous. So by this stage, it is just a total siege. So Northern Ireland are playing 10 men behind the ball, almost all of them in the penalty box. There's a free kick lofted in from the left. It's headed away. It comes out to the edge of it. Miguel Alonso, so Zabi's dad, fires one in. Mal Donaghy closes him down. The ball sort of scoots off towards the right wing. Donaghy and Camacho, I think, go after it. Neither of them gets it in time. There's like these sort of bump shoulders, and Camacho's momentum. Camacho's momentum then carries him into the defence. He stops all right. He turns around, squares up to Donaghy, who just places a hand on his chest and pushes him away. But that was enough.
Yeah, very naughty, the old hand in the chest in 1982. Notorious sending off.
Camacho doesn't make anything of it.
No, he doesn't. No.
It's not that Camacho suddenly flings himself down, but it is right next to Enrique Lubo Reveredo, the Peruvian linesman, and it's he flags. It's his decision.
Yeah.
And Ortiz is only too keen to get mark his only World Cup game with a red card.
Indeed, and I think the commentary line at the time as well. The linesman just made the referee's mind up for him.
Yeah. But the thing is, though, the one you mentioned earlier, who was it that kicked the player in retaliation?
Was it
McAvoy on Sarah, yeah.
Yeah, that should have been probably a sending off, to be fair. So maybe he had that in mind. I mean, I don't know.
He had plenty of opportunities.
True.
Of all the things that happened in that game, you listed them in order of most red card worthy.
Yeah.
This is down
Way
at number
down.
50 or something. It's nowhere near the top.
Yeah, well, I think Martin O'Neill later does say that just by this stage, Northern Ireland were getting nothing, and he did think, and it's not a case of sour grapes because obviously Northern Ireland win the match, but they did genuinely feel that the referee was giving the Spanish every possible opportunity to win this match.
Yeah, well, they were down to 10 men, and instead of sort of 11 men behind the ball, they had to have 10 men behind the ball, and but they held out though, didn't? I mean, again, looking at the highlights and some, there didn't seem to be too many Spanish chances, Michael.
No, I think there's maybe one chance with 3 or 4 minutes to go where Pat Jennings is a little bit uncertain, but other than that, it's nerve-wracking, it's exhausting,
Sure.
but it's as comfortable as withstanding a siege can be.
Yeah, it's all that sort of warm weather training in Brighton probably paid off, Jonathan. But it was. They played it out very, very well for an incredible victory.
Yeah, I mean, there's that one chance with I think it's about 9 minutes to go where there's a cross comes in, Queenie can't quite get there, and then Sarah messes up his shot at the back post, and he probably should do better. But it doesn't actually result in a proper shot. It's just it's a dangerous cross that we should do better with. And then there's the incident Michael talks about where I think it's just a long ball from Alonso, isn't it? And he just bounces up a bit strangely, and Jennings has to sort of backpedal and sort of palm it away, which is one of those where it shouldn't be a chance, but I can imagine in the moment, if you're in the stadium and watching on telly, you'd be absolutely shitting yourself. Pat Jennings looking uncertain is such a rare thing that's gonna cause panic.
Yeah, but you're right.
They did defend. They did defend very well, and I think Spain were just a little bit. You saw throughout the tournament because they go through into that group with England and West Germany, lost to West Germany, drew 0-0 against England, but they just didn't have any creativity. Their entire mode of attack was just lump it into the box, and of course, players used to playing the British game are entirely happy to deal with crosses.
Yeah, but I mean, Northern Ireland obviously needed to hold out to go through without having to draw lots, but it would have only been slightly bettered, if I may say, if they'd have got that second one and knocked Spain out, of course. Yeah. But I think down to 10 men, that was probably very unlikely.
No, it was a great win, and there are 2 or 3 great little anecdotes from after the game. No, and of course, I'm sure these have grown in the telling over the years. But the first one is, I think, Jerry Armstrong and Tommy Cassidy from Burnley who'd come on in the second half were taken away for the drugs test. And it takes them 90 minutes to give a sample because they're so dehydrated. So the Spanish doctors, Spanish policemen with guns are feeding them beer and wine. So come on, lads, we just need a sample. So they get pissed before they can give a sample. And
Jerry Armstrong apparently singing Danny Boy as he drinks more and more.
Superb.
Oh, so they get back to the hotel in Valencia. And there are all of these messages from across Northern Ireland. And so 2 in particular that jump out. And one is from Charles Hockey, who's the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland at the time. And the other's from Aine Paisley. So there is, as much as we said earlier, that it's just if there's this brief moment of cross-community fraternity, then that was certainly worth everything else in the match. But the best one is actually whenever they get to Madrid. So the second group stage is going to be held in Madrid, and they crossed the Yugoslavians coming down the stairs because the Yugoslavians were so convinced that Spain were going to beat Northern Ireland, they moved into the hotel.
Oh my goodness. Were any words exchanged, or was it just glances?
I think hopefully just a smug nod as we went upstairs.
Yeah, I hope they've got the right TV channel in the hotel, boys. Because in that second group stage, they drew 2-2 with Austria and then lost 4-1 to France. Because France knocked them out 4-0 in 1958, so it was France again who knocked them out.
It was a very good French team, and I think we felt slightly aggrieved because Martin O'Neill scores really quite a nice goal after about 8 or 9 minutes that is wrongly ruled out for offside. And that's not just, VAR definitely would have given it the call because he's onside by about a yard. But I think against that kind of team where they are of just such superior quality, chasing the game was never going to be possible.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they would appear at the World Cup in 1986 too. Bingham led them to that one, which was quite impressive. So they, considering how long it took to get to another major championship, the early mid-80s wasn't too bad for Northern Ireland in terms of qualification.
No, not at all. And sadly, the '86 World Cup didn't quite go as well, and Spain had their revenge. But we did end up playing Brazil, which gave rise to a really terrible film. Have you seen Shooting for Socrates?
I haven't.
Well, I see. The '82 World Cup would have been such a better tournament to make a film of for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But there's no Irish film from about 6 or 7 years ago about the Northern Irish campaign in Mexico. And it's really bad. And the kind of thing that really annoys me is making Socrates the Brazilian captain, because he wasn't.
Yeah, you see. What a note to finish on, Michael. Marvellous stuff. Well, thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure talking to you about this game. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk, everybody. But Jonathan and myself will be back next week with another great game from football. See you then.